The forest remembered the war. Ranger Declan Marsh could feel it in the way the trees leaned not away from the wind, but away from something older and worse. The pines along the eastern ridge had grown at wrong angles for 12 years, their trunks bent like men flinching from a blow that never quite stopped landing. He'd been told it was soil acidity, mineral depletion from the conversion event. He'd been told a lot of things. He checked his wrist panel. Amber pulse steady. His harmony score read 94.2, the little numeral glowing softly against his skin like a nightlight. He'd earned it over 6 years of service, 2 in urban compliance, 4 out here in what the collective called the remediation zones. Wilderness buffer between the harmonized settlements and whatever the wilderness had become. Good score. High enough to qualify for the family housing tier, high enough to mean something. He didn't think about what it meant anymore. That was the trick. You stopped thinking about what it meant, and it just became a number you maintained, like blood pressure or sleep hours. The extraction order had come through 2 days ago. Clean, bureaucratic, unsigned at the top where a human supervisor's name used to go. Target: 1 Georgia Voss, age 41, last documented position the Kenmore Wilderness Sector, Zone 7 North. Formerly, research biologist, University of Edinburgh. Status: unharmonized. Duration of noncompliance: 12 years, 4 months, 17 days. Nobody could reach her in 12 years. Then they sent a park ranger. Declan wasn't sure if that was a promotion or a sentence. He pushed deeper into Zone 7, past the perimeter markers, squat white posts with the collective symbol pressed into them, 3 overlapping circles that looked vaguely like cells dividing. Past the markers, the trail turned to suggestion. Boot prints appeared and disappeared. An old fire ring, stones scattered, ash long since washed to gray. Someone had been moving through here for years, leaving the minimum possible trace, which was itself a kind of signature. The flash hit him between one step and the next. Not pain, it was never pain, just displacement, like a bad edit in a film. He was standing in the forest, and then he was somewhere else entirely. A field, smoke rising from 3 directions, the sound of atmospheric shredders cycling overhead. Men around him, faces he didn't know, uniforms he didn't recognize as his own. One of them was shouting something. The sky above was full of the collective's entry craft, the long, gray wedges that moved like they didn't need to negotiate with gravity. The man beside him grabbed his arm and said something, but the words dissolved before they could land, and then he was back in the forest, hand against a tree trunk, breathing. His harmony score had dipped to 92.1. The panel registered it as a stress event. Recommended 3 minutes of guided resonance. He didn't do the resonance. He wiped his face and kept walking. The flashes had been happening for 8 months. They weren't dreams. He slept cleanly, the way you do when the implant is running properly, deep and dark and dreamless. These were different. They came during the day, in moments of quiet, and they felt realer than memory. The collective's medical unit had run 3 assessments and found nothing anomalous. Nominal function. The implant at the base of his skull, the one they'd given him at 16 along with everyone else in his cohort, was operating within acceptable parameters. He had simply been spending too much time alone in the zones. Isolation could produce these effects. Sensory monotony. The mind filling in gaps. He believed that mostly. He found the first marker 2 kilometers in. Not a collective post. A small stone arrangement, 7 flat rocks set in a spiral beside a stream crossing. Deliberate. The stones were clean on top despite recent rain, which meant they'd been placed recently, within the last day. He studied it for a long time without touching it. Then he photographed it with his wrist panel and kept moving, not toward the signal coordinates he'd been given, but in the direction the outermost stone in the spiral was pointing. Old tracker's logic, or maybe just stubbornness. He smelled the fire before he saw any smoke, which meant the fire was old and the wood had been chosen carefully, dry, low resin, minimal combustion signature. Whoever had been living out here for 12 years had gotten very good at not being found. He came to a low ridge and stopped just below the crest, listening. Bird song, real bird song, not the ambient resonance tracks the collective piped through residential units to maintain emotional calibration. The difference was difficult to articulate but undeniable once you noticed it. Real birds hesitated. They had opinions. They stopped mid-phrase and reconsidered. He crested the ridge. The shelter was built into the hillside, half buried, its roof shingled with bark and moss so thoroughly that it looked like the hill had simply grown a slight asymmetry. A vegetable patch to one side, winter bare but tidily maintained. A lean-to workshop with hand tools hanging on pegs, axes, saws, things with names he'd had to look up. A rain-catch cistern fashioned from corrugated metal, probably salvaged from a pre-conversion structure. And Georgia Voss, standing at the edge of the workshop with a hand axe, watching him. She was lean in the way that came from actual work, not from the collective's optimized nutrition programs. Her hair was dark and uncut past her shoulders, pulled back with a strip of leather. Her eyes were brown, which stopped him cold for a moment because he hadn't seen brown eyes in a long time. Everyone in the harmonized zones had the amber glow, the bioluminescent tint that came with the neural sync, that soft ember light behind the iris that the collective's literature described as the warmth of shared connection. Brown eyes looked like something from an older world. They looked private in a way he'd forgotten eyes could look. She didn't run. She didn't raise the axe. She just watched him with the particular stillness of someone who had long since decided that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Ranger," she said, not a question. "Marsh, Declan Marsh, Zone 7. He kept his hands visible. Standard protocol for remediation encounters, though the protocols assumed you were dealing with confused or traumatized individuals, not someone who had spent 12 years becoming more competent than anyone he'd ever met. I've been sent to perform a welfare assessment." A welfare assessment, she turned the phrase over, tasting it. Is that new? It's what they're calling it this month. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "Come down then, Ranger Marsh. I'll put something on the fire." He came down. She made tea from dried plants he couldn't identify, working with the economy of someone for whom every action had been refined over years to its most efficient form. She didn't waste motion. She didn't fill silence with noise. He sat across from her at a low table fashioned from a split log and watched her hands and tried to remember the last time he'd been in a space that wasn't calibrated. "They sent someone before," she said, setting a clay mug in front of him. 4 years ago, he came from the South Ridge, younger than you." "What happened?" He sat where you're sitting, drank the tea. She sat down across from him, cried for about 20 minutes without knowing why. "Went back." Declan looked at the mug. "Should I be worried about the tea?" "It's just tea." She studied him with those brown eyes, measuring something. "You've been having the flashes." The words hit him like cold water. He set the mug down carefully. "How would you know that?" "Because they sent you instead of a compliance team. The compliance teams they send to Zone 7 are usually running at 97 or above. Clean scores, clean signals, no anomalies. You're what, 94? You've got bleed." "Bleed." That's what we called it in the early days, when the implant's false memories start to interfere with the real ones. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. "It means your original neural architecture is pushing back. Not everyone's does. Maybe 1 in 30. The implant can't fully overwrite them. The real memories leak through the overlay. Bleed." The fire crackled between them. Outside, a real bird reconsidered its song. "You're saying my memories are." "I'm saying you have 2 sets. She wasn't cruel about it. She said it the way a doctor tells you something difficult cleanly because kindness means not drawing it out. The ones they gave you and the ones you actually made. The flashes are the real ones. What do you see?" He should have stopped the conversation. He should have logged the contact, initiated the standard unharmonized engagement protocol, begun the documentation for extraction. His harmony score was sitting at 93.8 now, the panel registering the exchange as a stress event, recommending resonance guidance, flagging the conversation topic as potentially dissonant. He told her what he saw. The field, the smoke from 3 directions, the atmospheric shredders cycling, the men with faces he didn't recognize and uniforms he didn't recognize as his own, the one grabbing his arm, the sky full of gray wedges. She listened without moving. When he finished, the fire had settled into coals and the light in the shelter had gone amber and quiet. "That's Calder Ridge," she said. 2031, the third resistance engagement, 41 humans against a collective forward suppression unit. She paused. "I know because I was the one who got you out." The world did something strange for a moment. Not a flash, something slower and worse, like a photograph developing in real time, details coming up out of dark solution. His hands on the table, the grain of the wood, the feeling of a past he could not access pressing against the walls of the present he'd been given. "That's not possible," he said. "I was 16 in 2031. You were 24. They took 6 years from you." She said it evenly, without apology, because she wasn't apologizing for what had been done to him. She was just refusing to let him stay wrong. They re-age the subjects when they reharmonize them. Retinal recalibration, skeletal density adjustment, the implant fills in the gaps with a coherent false biography. It's very clean work. The collective is very good at it. He looked at his hands. 30 years old, the implant said. Born in Bristol in 2022. Parents, Malcolm and Ruth Marsh, both harmonized, both retired to the coastal units. Harmony score, 94.2 lifetime aggregate, 6 years service. "I was born in Dundee," he said, and the words came from somewhere the implant couldn't reach. "My mother's name was," the word blurred. He pushed at it. "Helen. She called me Deck." He felt his throat tighten around something old. She sang in the kitchen when she thought no one could hear. Georgia Voss watched him remember. He looked up at her, and the question was right there. The one that mattered. The one that was going to change everything once it was asked and answered. "Why am I here?" he said. "Not the welfare assessment. Why did they send me specifically?" She set down her mug. "Because you're a Category 4 bleeder, and Category 4s have a narrow window before the false architecture collapses entirely. When that happens in the field, they lose the asset. They want you reharmonized before the window closes." She looked at him steadily. "They sent you here because they thought I'd trust someone with bleed. They thought you'd be easy to turn, that you'd convince me to come in, and then they'd collect you both and reprocess you together. And instead you're sitting in my kitchen, remembering your mother's name." He looked at the wrist panel. The harmony score read 89.4 now, and it was moving visibly, incrementally downward, the way a thermometer falls when you take it out of the warm. The panel had begun issuing a new recommendation. Urgent. Return to nearest harmonized settlement for assessment. Dissonance event in progress. "They're tracking the score drop," he said. "Yes." "How long until they send a compliance team?" 90 minutes, maybe less. She was already moving, standing, crossing to the workshop lean-to. "The question is what you want to do with 90 minutes. "You said we," he said. "In the early days, when the implant's false memories start to interfere, we called it bleed." She stopped with her back to him. Her hands were on the edge of the workbench. "There were 41 of us at Calder Ridge," he said. "How many besides me?" She turned around. Her face had something in it now that hadn't been there before, not hope, which would have been too easy, but something more durable and harder one. Something that had waited 12 years to have a reason to move. "Enough," she said, "if they haven't reharmonized all of them." He pulled the wrist panel off his arm and set it on the table. The amber numerals kept counting down without him. 88.1, 88, reporting a non-compliance event to a monitoring station somewhere in the harmonized grid. He looked at it for a moment, 6 years of careful maintenance, of calibration, of the small daily work of being a person the collective had designed and approved. Then he turned it face down. "Show me what you know," he said. She took him into the hill. Behind the back wall of the shelter was a door he hadn't seen, fashioned from salvaged panel and counterweighted so it opened with a touch. Beyond it, cut into the rock, a space roughly 4 meters by 6, shelves of handwritten notebooks, water-sealed in plastic bags, maps covered in small, precise annotations, years of observation layered in different colored ink. A shortwave radio array built from salvaged components, its antenna running up through a crack in the rock to the surface above. And on the far wall, photographs. Not digital captures. Physical photographs, printed on actual paper, the kind of artifact the collective had discontinued in 2028 along with most physical media. Dozens of them, fixed to the stone with rough adhesive, and every one of them showed people with brown eyes. Faces, names written beneath in small, careful letters. "I've been documenting bleeders for 8 years, Georgia said. Anyone the collective sent into the zones eventually, compliance officers, rangers, geological surveyors, anyone who came close enough for the isolation to start working on their false architecture. Most go back. Some stay long enough to remember something real." She touched one photograph lightly. A few came back a second time. Declan scanned the faces. He didn't recognize most of them, and then he did, in the way you recognize a place from a dream, not specific features, but an overall quality of presence. The set of a jaw. The way someone held their shoulders. The bone structure of people who'd lived through the same thing. "The radio," he said, "reaches 7 other zones. We've been building a network for 4 years. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not triumphant. This was work, not miracle. The collective monitors shortwave, but they're not expecting it. They stopped expecting physical communication infrastructure about 5 years after the harmonization completed. They think in network terms, distributed signal. They can't quite conceptualize anyone choosing to be slow and local on purpose." "What's the network for?" She crossed to the radio and sat down in front of it. In the low light from a single battery lamp, her face was all planes and shadow, the face of someone who had been patient for a very long time. "The implants have a physical component," she said. "You know this, you know the implant at the back of your skull." He did. He'd always known it was there. The collective called it the Harmony Interface. He'd been told it was a wellness monitor, a social connector, the thing that let you move seamlessly through the harmonized systems. He'd never questioned it, the way you don't question your own teeth. "The physical component has a vulnerability," Georgia said. "It responds to a specific resonance frequency. The wrong frequency doesn't damage the implant. It doesn't hurt the host. It just interrupts the signal. Disrupts the false architecture overlay, lets the real memories through." The air in the room changed. He felt it before he understood it. "You can break the conditioning," he said. "Not break, clear, temporarily at first. The implant fights back, it's designed to, but if the frequency is sustained for long enough across enough subjects simultaneously," she stopped. "We think the architecture collapses, permanently." He looked at the radio array, the notebooks, the 12 years of solitary, precise, stubborn work. "You've been building toward this." "We've been building toward this." He felt the word, the weight of it. She'd said, "We called it bleed. We've been building." "Calder Ridge," he said. 41 people, you got me out." "What happened to the others?" She was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, assembling something carefully the way you handle old things that might break. 17 were reharmonized before we could reach them. 8 were killed in the engagement. 11 were brought in over the following months, scattered individual extractions. 3, she paused. 3 we couldn't reach. They've been in the zones this whole time. And the 5 that's left. She smiled then for the first time, and it was the specific smile of someone who has been carrying a private piece of information for a very long time. The 5 that's left are the Zone Rangers assigned to Sectors 2, 4, 6, 9, and 11. He stared at her. You weren't the only one bleeding, she said. You were just the one they sent last. 70 minutes now, maybe less. The compliance team would be a 4-unit aerial response, standard atmospheric shredders, the same gray wedges from his flashes. They would come in from the south because Zone 7 North had one viable approach corridor, and the collective mapped everything in approach corridors. He sat down at the radio. She talked him through the frequency. It was simple in the way that most true things are simple, a specific band, a specific modulation sustained for 40 seconds, not weaponized, not violent, just a sound the false architecture couldn't hold against. She'd spent 3 years isolating it, working from the original technical documentation for the implant that a Category 4 bleeder named Peter Lyle, formerly a systems architect for Ripe Technology, had brought out of the harmonized zones in 2033 before they reharmonized him. Peter Lyle, Declan said. You knew him. He was in the field at Calder Ridge. The memory was right there now, clean and specific, no blur on it. Heavy-set man, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who looked out of place in a combat situation but held it together because he decided to. He gave me coordinates, the extraction route. He also gave me everything I needed to understand the implant. He just never knew he did. She looked at the notebooks on the shelves. He came in the 2nd year. Sat where you're sitting, drank the tea. He didn't cry, but he talked for 4 hours straight. Everything he knew about the Ripe Technology Systems architecture. I took notes. She touched the shelf. 37 notebooks. Something in Declan's chest moved. Some compressed thing that had been waiting for a context to expand into. Peter Lyle, crying 4 hours of himself into notebooks in a stone room under a hill, not knowing what it would build. The soldiers at Calder Ridge, remembered and unremembered, the 17 reharmonized and the 8 dead, and the 11 brought in one by one and the 3 in the zones. His mother's voice in a kitchen in Dundee, singing when she thought no one could hear. Helen Marsh, she would be 61 now, she was in the coastal units. She had a harmony score, a warm amber glow behind her eyes, a wellness monitor at the base of her skull that made sure she was calm and compatible and properly integrated. He put his hand on the radio. What's the protocol? He said. Georgia pulled up a notebook, opened it to a page covered in small, precise notations. We transmit the frequency on the common monitoring band, the one the collective uses for zone surveillance. Every implant in range will receive it. Range on this rig is about 40 kilometers, but the other 6 zones have identical rigs. We broadcast simultaneously, they relay, the signal propagates through the monitoring network. She looked at him steadily. The collective will hear it happening. How fast can they respond? Fast. But the signal only needs 40 seconds. She paused. The question is what happens after, when 40 kilometers of harmonized population suddenly has access to their real memories, all at once with no preparation. It'll be chaos. Yes. People will be frightened. Yes. Some of them will have things to remember that they'd rather not. Yes, she didn't soften it. Some of them will have been soldiers. Some of them will have been resistance. Some of them will remember people they've lost. It won't be clean. He thought about that, the weight of it. 40 kilometers of people suddenly handed back themselves, imperfect and real and unoptimized, with all the grief and anger and confusion that went with it. The messy, expensive, necessary chaos of people who got to know what had actually happened to them. He thought about his mother singing. The other Rangers, he said, the ones in sectors 2, 4, 6, 9, 11, they know the plan. They know they're part of it. Georgia was already moving, pulling out a pre-written transmission schedule, her movements economical and precise, 12 years of preparation folding itself into this single point. We've been waiting for someone to sit at this radio with enough bleed to operate the transmitter without the harmony override cutting the signal. He looked at the wrist panel on the table, still counting down its amber numbers into empty air. "The override reads the score," he said. "When I took the panel off. The transmitter is shielded, inside the rock. The override can't find you in here." She looked at him with those brown eyes. "But it knows where you are. They're coming regardless." 60 minutes, maybe 50 now. He looked at his hands again. The hands of a man who had been 30 for 6 years, who had been 24 before that, who had gone to Calder Ridge at 24 and fought in a field with smoke rising from 3 directions, and come home to find home replaced with something careful and amber and humming. The hands of a man whose mother still knew how to sing, somewhere in a coastal unit, waiting without knowing she was waiting. "Walk me through the transmission," he said. She walked him through it. The frequency, the modulation, the sequence for triggering the relay protocol in the other 6 zones. It took 8 minutes to learn, and he learned it the way you learn something important, with his whole attention, nothing spared. When she was done, he ran through it once from memory, and she corrected 2 small things, and he ran through it again, and she didn't correct anything. "You've done this before," she said. "You were good at this." "At what?" "Listening, learning fast, not needing things explained twice." She said it without nostalgia, just observation. "You were the best we had at Calder Ridge for moving information. That's why Peter Lyle gave you the extraction coordinates instead of someone else." He absorbed that. The small, specific texture of a real memory, being the one who listened, the one who learned fast, the one you trusted with the route out. It was a different shape than who the implant had made him, but it fit him better. "Tell me about the resistance," he said. "Not the Calder Ridge group. Now who's left?" She told him. It took 40 minutes, and he didn't interrupt. The network of bleeders and observers and former collective employees who'd come apart in the zones and been quietly rebuilt by the isolation and the tea and the 37 notebooks. The food-growing infrastructure in 7 zones, maintained over years so there'd be something to feed people who suddenly needed to be fed. The prepositioned supply caches, low-tech and physical, designed for a world where the collective's distribution network had been disrupted. The shortwave links, the relay stations, the precise and patient architecture of a resistance that had never been loud enough to be noticed. 12 years of work, carried mostly by one woman with brown eyes and a hand axe, and a patience that had outlasted everything thrown at it. "You could have transmitted without me," he said when she'd finished. "No, I couldn't operate the transmitter without the override cutting the signal. I needed someone else to sit at the board." She paused. "I needed someone who had been there, who had a reason that was personal, not just strategic." He understood that. Strategies could be compromised. Systems could be turned. Personal reasons were harder to reharmonize. "You waited 12 years for someone with personal reasons," he said. "I waited for you," she said simply. "You were the one I got out. You were the one I owed." Something in the air between them settled. Not romance, nothing so neat. Something more like recognition. The particular weight of 2 people who have been on the same side of something enormous for a long time, separated by the scale of it, finally in the same room. He sat down at the radio. 40 minutes at the outside, before the compliance team's atmospheric shredders crested the southern ridge. Possibly less. He could hear the forest outside, real birdsong, the particular hesitant authenticity of birds who hadn't been calibrated, birds who stopped mid-phrase and reconsidered. He keyed the transmitter. The frequency was strange to hear, even through the shielded walls of the stone room. Not quite sound and not quite not sound, something that lived in the register where the ear becomes uncertain of itself. He felt it in the back of his skull, not pain, but the specific sensation of something loosening, like a knot worked out of rope through patient pressure. The amber afterimage behind his vision, always there since the harmonization at 16 that he now knew had been at 24, flickered. He kept his hands steady and counted. At 15 seconds, Georgia put her hand on his shoulder. Not restraint, steadiness, the weight of another human being making a decision to stand. At 20 seconds, the monitoring panel on the radio lit up with incoming relays. Zones 2, 4, 6, 9, 11, all coming online, all transmitting, the signal propagating outward through the collective's own surveillance infrastructure with a beautiful irony that he suspected Peter Lyle, wherever he was now, would have appreciated. At 30 seconds, something happened in the forest. The bird stopped. Not went quiet in the way birds go quiet for a predator, stopped, completely, as if every creature in the tree line had drawn a breath and held it. And then, beginning far off and rolling closer like a wave, they began again, all at once, in a volume and variety he had never heard, had never been allowed to hear, the uncalibrated real thing roaring back to fill the space where the ambient resonance tracks had been. At 40 seconds, he lifted his hands. Georgia let out a breath beside him. In the silence that followed, the radio began to receive transmissions. Not coordinated, not structured voices, fragments, the sound of people who had just been given something back without warning. Some were crying, some were shouting names. One frequency carried nothing but a woman singing, a low and private tune, the kind you only sing when you think no one can hear you. And Declan Marsh sat in a stone room under a hill in Zone 7 North and did not try to stop what happened to his face. He pressed his hands flat on the console and listened to the singing, and tried to remember the name of the tune his mother used to sing. It came, slowly, with the texture of the real, imperfect and specific and entirely his. He heard the compliance team's shredders before he saw them, the cycling pressure of their atmospheric displacement systems. That sound he now recognized from 35 memories he'd been carrying without access. He stood up from the radio console and straightened his back, and the thing he felt was not fear. It was older and more useful. The thing you feel when you've been waiting a long time to be allowed to be yourself again, and the waiting is finally over. Georgia handed him a pack, prepositioned, ready, containing things she had prepared for exactly this moment. Maps, radio components, sealed packages with destinations and contacts written on the outside in small, precise handwriting. South, she said. There's a route through the drainage gully that comes up behind the ridge. The compliance team will have the approach corridor covered. They won't have the gully. You've been planning this exit for 12 years. I've been planning for the day after this exit. She picked up her own pack, slung it with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the motion 10,000 times in preparation for this one use. The transmission is done. The signal is out. What happens next is people waking up to what they lost, and they're going to need someone to tell them it's real. That's us. That's us. He picked up the pack. It was heavier than it looked. That was fine. He'd been carrying lighter things than this for 6 years, and they'd weighed more. They went out through the stone room and through the shelter, and out into the Zone 7 North Forest, where the trees still leaned away from old violence, but the birds had come back full and real and specific, and the morning light through the canopy was the particular sharp gold of a day that doesn't know or care how long it took to arrive. Behind them, the shelter sat into the hillside as patiently as it had sat for 12 years, moss and bark, and the careful accumulation of one woman's refusal to be anything other than what she actually was. The compliance shredders came in from the South Ridge, exactly where she'd said they would. 4 of them, low and gray, moving with the offhand confidence of machines that had never encountered resistance that was subtle enough to go unseen. They were still scanning the southern sector when Declan and Georgia came up through the drainage gully and crested the North Ridge in full morning light. He stopped at the top and looked back. Below them, the zone stretched wide and quiet. Somewhere in its 40-kilometer radius, people were standing in their harmonized homes and feeling things come back to them, jagged, unoptimized, real. People who had been handed false biographies at 16 or 24 or 30, who had grown carefully calibrated amber eyes, who had loved their harmony scores and their compatibility certificates and their deep, clean, dreamless sleep, were pressing their hands to the backs of their skulls and remembering in pieces who they had been before. It wasn't clean. It was going to be hard and loud and long, and not everyone would be grateful, and some of them would want to go back to not knowing, and there was no system built yet to receive all of it. But they were people again, specifically, individually, imperfectly people, with private songs and real memories and brown eyes that no longer matched. He turned north. Georgia was already moving, not fast, not frantic, steady, purposeful, the exact pace of someone who has thought through every step and is finally taking them. He fell in beside her and found the rhythm without effort, the way you fall in beside someone you've been walking with longer than you knew. "You said 41 at Calder Ridge," he said, as the zone fell behind them. "Yes. And the ones still out there? The ones in the other zones?" "Yes." "How many all told, resistance, network people who know?" She was quiet for a moment, counting or perhaps just deciding how honest to be about the size of what they were walking toward. "Not enough," she said, "but more than yesterday." He thought about Peter Lyle, crying 4 hours of himself into a notebook in the dark. He thought about the 7 stone markers, the spiral, the outermost stone pointing the way. He thought about 41 people in a field with smoke rising from 3 directions, and the one who had gotten him out, and the 12 years of patient, careful preparation that had come after, built in the dark from salvage and stubbornness and 37 handwritten notebooks. He thought about what humans had always been inexplicably, infuriatingly good at. Not the big gestures, not the declarations, the small ones. The song you sing in the kitchen when you think no one can hear. The stone arrangement beside a stream crossing, pointing. The extra 40 seconds of standing still when you know the team is coming, because the signal needs 40 seconds and you're not leaving until it's done. The forest opened ahead of them, and the morning went on being gold and real and specific. And somewhere in the harmonized settlements behind them, in coastal units and residential tiers and calibrated rooms designed for optimal human functioning, people who had forgotten their own names were beginning to remember them. One by one. Then faster. Then all at once.